The year is 1597, is choked with the jagged silhouettes of a massive armada. 300 Japanese warships, their sails billowing like the wings of predatory birds, approach the Korean coastline with the arrogance of an unstoppable tide. Standing against this leviathan is not a grand fleet, but a lonely Panoxianals. If you appreciate the deep dive into the Panoxian vessels, the strategic brilliance of history's greatest underdogs, make sure to subscribe to Against All Odds, where we dissect the moments when the impossible became reality. We are about to witness the mind of calculation of naval warfare, refused to accept defeat even when his own government had abandoned him. To understand how Yi Sun-sin found himself standing on the precipice of total annihilation, we must look at the geopolitical climate of the late 16th century. The Joseon dynasty was reeling from years of brutal invasion by the forces of Toyotomi was simple. The Japanese strategy as a springboard for an invasion of Ming China. However, their progress had been stalled by a persistent, rhythmic and devastating series of naval defeats orchestrated by Admiral Yi Sun-sin. He was an officer of unmatched tactical entwits, where current, tide and terrain were more valuable than raw tonnage. His spire, despite his successes, palace intrigue and jealous rivals had led to his arrest, jealous torture, leaving the Korean Navy in shambles under less capable commanders. The Japanese fleet, sensing a vacuum of leadership to obliterate the remnants of Korean resistance. When they arrived, they expected a broken, demoralized force. Instead, they found Yi Sun-sin, who had been reinstated only after the absolute destruction of his successor's fleet left the nation single vacuum defensive line. Admiral Yi Sun-sin was tasked with a suicide soldier, but he famously replied that he still had 12 ships to the death. He possessed a profound understanding under his command. He possessed a profound understanding of the Myeongnyang Strait, a narrow channel where the swirling, violent currents of the sea turned a simple passage into a natural trap. The sheer weight of 400 enemy vessels would crush him in minutes. Mathematics was against him, but geography was his trump card. He spent the days leading up to the battle studying the tidal patterns, waiting for the precise moment, when the sea itself would serve as his secondary weapon. On the morning of the battle, the Japanese armada appeared. The sight alone was enough to make his sailors tremble, their hands shaking. That psychological warfare was just understood that Einigen Mofsru was just as critical as the cannons mounted on his decks. He remained calm, projecting an iron resolve that stabilized his crew. He moved his meager fleet into the heart of the strait to funnel into a narrow gap. When the first wave of Japanese ships pools surged forward, they encountered not just the iron-shielded hulls of the Panoxian, but a chaotic, roiling current that turned their maneuverability into a liability. The ships began to crowd one another, their hulls flanking the Korean line by the very terrain Fire had intended to conquer. Yi Sun-sin opened B with everything he possessed. The thunder of the cannons echoed off the cliffs, turning the strait into a basin of fire and splintered wood. The Korean ships, reinforced with wood that resisted the Japanese arquebus fire, stood firm. As the enemy ships were hampered by the prison of a sculpt tide, Yi Sun-sin moved with the fuss in battle. He orchestrated did not just fight a battle. He orchestrated a dance of destruction. He identified the lead Japanese flagship and concentrated all firepower upon it. When its commander fell, panic rippled through the Japanese ranks. The synergy between Admiral Yi Sun-sin's absolute command and Yi Sun's absolute command and the desperate Kokusafen created a focused courage of his men. The Japanese generals had never anticipated. The battle lasted for hours, a grueling test of endurance and nerve. As the tide turned back, the very water that had restricted the Japanese now became a hammer, driving their broken ships into one another. The sea turned dark with the wreckage of the armada, and the Japanese commanders that their numerical advantage had finally signaled a retreat by the genius of rout. It was not a defeat, it was a rout. Against 300 ships, Yi Sun-sin had not lost a single vessel. He had demonstrated that history is not determined by the size of an army, but by the strategic intellect of its leader and the unwavering commitment of its soldiers to a cause greater than their own survival. The consequences of this victory were seismic. It halted the Japanese naval advancement and bought the Joseon forces the precious time they needed to reorganize. However, the cost of such a victory was heavy, and the toll on the men who fought beneath the banners of the Korean fleet was immense. Yi Sun-sin's success proved that even in the face of an impossible disparity, the human spirit, when guided by logic and courage, can shift trajectory of these conflicts, not to glorify the violence of the past. It serves our present, but to understand the patterns of leadership that define our present. War is a tragedy that leaves scars on every soul involved, as it history to the brilliance of a master tactician, of Admiral Yi Sun-sin. We look back on the story of Admiral Yi Sun-sin. We must ask ourselves how many other hidden figures have changed the course of history through sheer force of will. The lessons of Myeongnyang are timeless, and never underestimate the power of a single resolute mind. We have only scratched the surface of the tactical depth of this battle, and there is so much more to uncover about the way these strategies continue to influence military theory today. If you found this journey into the heart of the Myeongnyang Strait the like button, and yet sharing this episode with fellow history enthusiasts, your engagement allows us to keep digging deeper into the archives, to bring you the stories that textbooks often gloss over or forget. Few subscribe to Against All Odds into the conflicts that shaped our world. Peace is a fragile necessity, and by understanding the mistakes and the triumphs of those who came before us, we might better appreciate the weight of the history we are living today. Thank you for watching, and stay curious. Beyond the immediate tactical genius displayed in the narrow, churning waters of Myeongnyang, one must themselves dominate the defined imagination. While the battles themselves dominate the historical imagination war, the theater of conflict was held together, or torn apart, by the capability of the Joseon bureaucracy to supply its front lines. Admiral Yi was not merely a fleet commander. He was a master of raw instability. Throughout the war, he operated under a crown king that was often suspicious of his popularity. Gunpowder, rice frequently failed to provide the necessary gunpowder, rice, and timber to maintain his fleet. To understand his victory at Myeongnyang as a self-sustaining entity amidst an atmospheric pressure of betrayal and neglect, consider the composition of the fleet itself. These were not the pristine, well-funded vessels of a global empire. Many of the ships that ventured into the strait were patched together, salvaged from the wreckage of previous engagements, or hastily constructed under the direst of circumstances. The sailors, too, were a mix of hardened veterans and traumatized survivors. Yi Sun-sin had to foster a culture of absolute loyalty, to break under the psychological weight of the Japanese superiority. He operated with the awareness that there was no naval safety net. There was no naval reserve to call upon, no reinforcements arriving by sea, and no diplomatic safety net. Every ship lost was a permanent reduction in the defensive capacity of the kingdom. This reality makes the decision to engage at Myeongnyang not just a daring maneuver, but an act of profound, calculated desperation. Looking at the Japanese forces, we find that the Japanese forces, led by figures like Todo Takatora, were not oblivious to the dangers of the strait. They had their own competent commanders who understood the engagement in such tight quarters. The arrogance that led them into the bottleneck was a symptom of a larger geopolitical miscalculation. The Japanese leadership believed that the sheer volume of their fleet would compensate for the terrain. They viewed the conflict through a lens of conventional warfare, where superior numbers inevitably erode the integrity of a smaller defensive line. They failed to account for the psychological dominance Yi Sun-sin had established. He had become, in the eyes of the invaders, a figure of near mythical proportions, an unstoppable force whose presence alone could incite hesitation among the enemy ranks. This phenomenon of psychological warfare is often understood that morale is a force multiplier that can be manipulated through reputation. Before the first shot was fired, he had already begun to win the battle by projecting an aura of certainty. He utilized the topography not just as a physical weapon to crush the enemy hulls, but as a psychological trap that amplified their fears. By forcing them into a narrow channel where their numbers became a liability, he turned their confidence against them. This is a recurring pattern in history, where the defender, when possessed of a singular vision, can paralyze a vastly superior force through strategic intimidation. If we pivot our focus to the war on the Japanese campaign in Korea, we see that Yi Sun-sin essentially severed the artery of the Japanese logistics. The Japanese strategy relied on the Navy to transport troops, weapons completely closed, and at times, any Japanese army, the Admiral found dangerous, stunted the Japanese land routes. This logistical starvation stunted the Japanese momentum, preventing them from consolidating their gains in the northern provinces. The Battle of Myeongnyang in the coffin of the Japanese ambition to unify the peninsula and move into the Ming dynasty's territories. It is no exaggeration to say that the entire fate of East Asian stability in the 16th century rested upon the shoulders of one man and his 13 surviving ships. We should also examine the technological disparities that defined this conflict, that were highly effective for coastal boarding maneuvers, optimized for speed, and the infantry-heavy combat style favored by the samurai. In contrast, the infantry and Panoxian ships were designed for stability and heavy artillery bombardment. They were floating fortresses of resilient wood, capable of withstanding the imprint cannon volleys that shattered the thinner, less durable Japanese vessels. The innovation here was not just in the hardware, but in the tactical application of that hardware. Yi Sun-sin recognized that he did not need to board the enemy ships to win. By maintaining the standoff, he minimized the exposure of his crew to the lethal skill of the samurai swordsman. This is a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare, where the commander dictates the temporal of engagement to player, to their specific technological advantages. The study of this battle also challenges our modern obsession with the idea that victory can be achieved through technological superiority alone and long-range precision missiles as the end-all be-all of military dominance. Yet, Myeongnyang proves that technology is only effective as the environment in which it is deployed. A weapon is only as good as the commander's ability to predict the movement, the tide, and the behavior of the adversary within a specific geography. The currents of the Myeongnyang Strait were the most advanced weapon in the Admiral's arsenal, and they were a gift of nature that he learnt to exploit with CD6 with the precision of a surgeon. As we bring this reflection to a close, we must contemplate where systems, organizations, and corporate entities are often credited with the outcomes of global events. We tend to downplay the impact of the human agency, the capacity of a single mind to change a trajectory of an entire nation. Admiral Yi Sun-sin stands as a towering rebuttal to the idea the wrath of his own government, the loss of his command, and the physical personals of a brutal war. Yet he never once surrendered his principles or his dedication to his people. His life was defined by a commitment to duty that transcended personal ambition or political safety. The story of the 13 ships is ultimately, when pushed to the absolute brink of an human spirit, the situation of annihilation. It cannot be mitigated by the application so dieted and objective dejectos and of wisdom, courage, and objective reality. When we look at the ruins of history, we find that the most impactful a product of chance, but the result to take ultimate preparation and the willingness to take the ultimate risk for the sake of a greater cause. May this examination serve as a catalyst for your own curiosity. History is not a stagnant record of the past. It is a living, breathing guide for the challenges we face today. We are all tasked with navigating the treacherous waters of our time. The lessons in one's terrain, the importance of understanding one's terrain, the need to adapt to limited resources, and the necessity of moral clarity under fire remain as relevant now as they were 4 centuries ago. Whether you are trying to navigate the complexities of your own life, there is much to be gained from the wisdom of those who held their ground when all others had retreated. If this deep dive into strategic brilliance of a forgotten hero has resonated with you, consider the broader implications of these historical patterns. We continue to produce this content to ensure that the monumental deeds of modern life, your continued support, your comments, and continued exploring the fringe to share these narratives ensure that we can keep exploring the fringes of the historical archive. Stay tuned for our next layers of another pivotal moment that changed. Until then, questioning, keep analyzing of curiosity is written by those who refuse to be defined by the suffix that history. Keep tie is written by those who refuse to be defined by their circumstances. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your shared commitment to uncovering the truths of our past. Keep looking deeper, for the answers are always there if you know how to read the currents. To fully grasp the magnitude of these shifts, examine the friction between human ambition and the constraints of the natural world. Often we perceive the past a collection of static dates and predictable outcomes. Yet this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the process. In reality, the individuals who left an indelible mark on their societies were those who were a fluid element, constantly shifting in response to ingenuity. Instead, and the sudden appearance of unexpected variables, by shifting our perspective, we begin to see that these figures were not operating in our interests, where the margin for error was razor thin. Consider the logistical triumphs of those who managed to sustain long-term objectives despite isolation. Their ability to maintain managing the exhaustion of their resources speaks to a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. It was not merely their tactical superiority that secured their legacy, but their profound capacity for empathy and discipline in moments of extreme scarcity. They understood clearly that the structural integrity of those who serve it depends entirely. Implications of these studies become increasingly urgent. We exist in an era characterized by an unprecedented velocity of urgent, which often obscures the Dacian velocity of information, which often obscures the foundational principles of strategy and resilience. By anchoring ourselves in the deliberate study of past failures and successes, we create a safeguard against the myopia of the present. The archives are not merely dusty repositories of dead deeds. They are blueprints for navigation in an uncertain tomorrow. Continue to engage with these complex narratives, for the depth of your understanding, your ability to determine your ability to shape the world around you. Tom continues, when limit synths the wisdom of the ages with the requirements of the achievers, with the requirements of the modern moment.